Alrighty, welcome again, everyone, and good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Steve McClung, and my pronouns are he, him. I'm a research associate for the Texas Institute for Excellence in Mental Health at UT Austin, and I'm honored to be your host this morning for this panel entitled Youth Peer Support. I want to begin by thanking our wonderful moderator and panelists for being with us here today, and a big thanks to you all, too, for joining us this morning. We truly hope you find today's presentation engaging and helpful in your work. As a quick disclaimer, again, this presentation was prepared for the MHTTC network under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, aka SAMHSA. The opinions expressed in this presentation are the views of the speakers and don't reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services or SAMHSA. So all that said, all that out of the way, let's get started. We have an amazing moderator for today's panel, the one and only Tim Saubers. Tim serves as a program coordinator for workforce development for the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence, located at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, through a partnership with the Addiction Research Institute, located at the Steve Hicks School of Social Work at the University of Texas at Austin. He got a start as a Wisconsin certified peer specialist, a start as a Wisconsin certified peer specialist in 2016 in his work to direct support and supervisory roles. He's previously managed Wisconsin certified peer specialists and certified parent peer specialist state certification programs. And in addition to all that, Tim serves on a variety of state and national committees and work groups dedicated to advancing the peer profession, reforming the mental health and substance use services, and the rights of people living with disabilities, among all the other amazing work that Tim does. Tim centers the principles of equity and justice in his work while moving not just to disrupt and reform systems, but also to create new systems in their entirety. And so again, Tim, panelists, thank you so much for being with us this morning, and I'll pass it off to Tim to begin our presentation this morning.
It's my first time on Zoom, everyone. I apologize. Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Saubers. I use he, him, his pronouns. For a visual description, I'm a Latino man. I have black hair and black glasses, and I'm wearing a floral printed t-shirt. I'm sitting in front of some appliances and some cabinets. I am coming to you from the homelands of the Ho-Chunk people, who have always been here and will always be here. These otherwise occupied lands are also known as Madison, Wisconsin. But as mentioned, I do work for University of Texas, Austin. I'm really excited to be moderating this panel with some excellent panelists. And I think what we're going to do to get started before jumping into some questions is have everyone introduce themselves. So what I'm going to do is just call on you. And as I do, if you could come on camera and just talk a little bit about yourself. And why don't we start with Molly?
Hi, my name is Molly. My pronouns are she, her, and I have short reddish hair, and I'm wearing a blue t-shirt, and my background is cactus and the rainbow for Pride Month. And I'm a certified peer support worker with the University of New Mexico. I work with transitional aged youth.
Perfect. Thanks, Molly. Joel.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Joel Boltinghouse, and I'm the Executive Director of Behavioral Services of Louisiana. My pronouns are he, him. I am a middle-aged white guy. I have a salmon-y kind of shirt. I'm in front of or behind me is like a beige, gray wall and a brown chair, and I'm excited to be here.
Perfect. Thanks, Joel. Bonnie.
Hi, good morning. My name is Bonnie Stribling. I live in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I am a certified peer support specialist supervisor. I work for Natural State Recovery, and I also used to work for the Division of Youth Services here in Arkansas. My pronouns are her and she, and for a visual representation, I am also wearing a floral shirt with a blue sweater, and I identify as a white female. Behind me, I actually have a map and a picture of Anthony Bourdain. Love him. And I'm super grateful to be here. Thank you.
Perfect. Tyler.
Hi, my name's Tyler Ross. I'm a CPRSS in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I work for a nonprofit grassroots organization called OCARTA. I'm also a youth cohort, and I do outreach. And and my pronouns are he and him. I'm mid 30s with short brown hair, black and white glasses, and I have a red orange shirt on, and my background is teal. And I'm super excited to be here talking about the youth peer support with these great panelists. Thank you.
Awesome. And to finish us out, Jesse, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessie Davis. My pronouns are she and they. I am sitting in front of a virtual background that is orange and themed with the conference. I have glasses on with just longer than shoulder length hair, and I also am wearing a really comfy jacket. I work at the University of Texas with the South Southwest MHTTC, but I'm a peer specialist, and I have been working with youth and young adults or in this space for quite a while. And I have lived experience both in substance use and mental health. And I have worked with people both on the mental health and substance use spectrum, or not spectrum, areas in Texas, because here in Texas, we have them separated as certifications.
Perfect. Well, thanks everyone for taking a second to introduce yourselves. Right before we jump into questions, I did want to go through a couple of things just to make sure that we're all using some common language today during this panel. And the first was just to start with, I know this was mentioned already, but again, to clarify that the people on this panel are speaking and sharing their own opinions. They're not necessarily speaking on behalf of their own state, any sort of state governmental body or their employers. And so making it clear that when they're speaking, they're speaking for themselves. Angus says, I forgot David. David is not a panelist with us, but thank you for pointing that out in case I had missed him. Also wanted to name kind of the definitions of peer and youth that we're using for this panel, because youth can span such a diverse age range of children up to 18. Sometimes it goes up to 30, sometimes it stops at 25. We're going to be talking about youth kind of within all of those. So each person has a different definition of youth, but for the purposes of this panel, we're really going to be looking at it as kind of up to 30 as when we're talking about youth. And when we're talking about peer, again, it's somebody who has shared lived experiences, typically in this case around mental health or substance use, not necessarily being the exact same age at the exact same time when providing peer support services. So with that, we're going to jump right into the first question. And as we go through these questions, if you all have thoughts or if you have questions that come up for the panelists, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. We'd love to be able to have some questions for the panelists later. So question 1, how have you navigated sharing your lived experience effectively when providing peer support to youth? And we're going to start with Tyler.
Thank you, Tim. So for this, as I share my story, I'm very open with my usage at a young age. I'm very, there's no shaming, there's no judging. And I openly talk about, what they're sharing. I try to relate it. I try to, talk about things that affected me, what they were going through. And again, no shaming, no judging. I like to talk about the root cause. I like to talk about, peer pressure and those topics. But navigating the shared lived experience effectively, I, share who I am, open and honest. And that seems to be very well for me. And it seems to be getting feedback very well when I do that.
Perfect. Moving on to Molly.
I think when I think about navigating, like sharing lived experience, like my brain automatically clicks to strategic sharing and intentional peer support. And so basically I really try to make intentional and really thoughtful decisions about when and how I share my lived experience. I think it's really a lot about balance. I think it's important to know when to listen and when to share. And when I do share, it's important. I feel like it's really important to make sure that I share something that's helpful to the person, and remembering that it's not about me, which sounds funny, my lived experience isn't about me, but in this situation, a lot of times it's not. So I just always want to make sure that it's really purposeful and helpful, whether it's sharing something that, about myself to kind of instill some hope and be things get better, or this is something that I've experienced too, and this is how I dealt with it. Maybe it'll work for you, maybe not. Let's explore some options and see. but just always really purposeful. And I always want to make sure that I don't like focus on the trauma and focus on like things that are, you know, the parts about recovery and like that it gets better. I always like that someone told me one time that, you know, this isn't the trauma Olympics. Like, we're not trying to like out trauma somebody, or like, you know, went through something like equally awful, but just to stay really positive. And I think that works really well.
So sharing with intentionality, really being focused on not what has happened that's caused harm, but how do we navigate through it? How do we move forward? And what both of you said, kind of being really open and finding a way to adapt that, because you're speaking to a youth and who may interpret things or hear things differently than an adult would. All right, what about you, Joel? How have you navigated sharing your lived experience effectively when providing peer support to youth?
Yeah, I think, you know, what's already been said, Molly saying, reference, I think the why is a big thing that is foremost in my mind. You know, you like Molly said, you know, you don't want it to be about you. You want to have a reason. And I think there's a time and a way to do it. And I think, I don't want to say less is more, but I think the pure magic or special sauce, whatever you want to call it, is the just to make that youth, going back to what Tyler says, there's no shaming, you know, like I walk a mile in, you know, your shoes, you know, just like I've hurt, I've suffered, I know what that's like. And just so kind of just making sure that that youth is doesn't see you as a perfect person, doesn't see you as this great authority or whatever, but that pure, you know, like we have this shared connection through our past. And I think that's an important thing to convey with youth.
Yeah, really holding tight to that core value of mutuality and trying to be as equal as we can, always being cognizant of the power dynamics that come within a paid relationship. But yeah, really striving to be in that space together and naming with the youth, you know, you're hurting, I'm here in this space with you. I've been there, we can be here together, rather than you need to stop feeling that way.
Yeah.
Awesome. Jesse, what do you think? What say you?
I echo pretty much everything that people have said so far. One thing that I do want to add, though, is as a young person, I know I personally was always told what to do or talked to by people who were older than me or who were supposed to be supporting me, and I wasn't really listened to. And I would have gotten a lot more support and a lot more effective support had I been listened to more than talked to. And so that's what I try to do. I try to listen rather than talk, and I try to talk the least out of all of the sessions. If I'm talking more than the person I'm supporting as a peer supporter, then I'm probably not really peer supporting them. And so I just want to echo, keep mutuality and authenticity at the forefront of all our interactions with young people. That is, for me, one of the most vital things that I can do in supporting youth.
Yeah, and that's such a great point, Jesse. This idea that often, and I think all of you touched on this, that it can feel like I'm in a peer support role, so my role is to share my story kind of at all times with everyone. It's important that I get to do this, and really shifting to how do I share strategically and intentionally and otherwise listen, and building up that listening skill set, particularly with youth, can be more impactful than necessarily starting out by sharing our story. Bonnie, why don't you wrap us up?
Absolutely. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to add to everything that has been said. I definitely feel the same way. I also think that it's really important to understand that I may have been their age at one time, whether I'm older or younger than them, or younger, obviously they're younger, but it's important for me to identify that they are in that moment right there. And so I want to, like Jesse was saying, create a safe space for them to share. And I am there to listen and to learn. When I share my story, I do think that authenticity is so important. I feel like young people and youth definitely identify with authenticity. And so if I'm coming in with an agenda and not being intentional, like was mentioned before, they can definitely read that. So it's so important for me to just be who I am and be comfortable with that with them. And so I do have to work on that as a peer specialist, to be comfortable with myself and being comfortable with my story. Am I using it as a tool to assist in connection? So that has been a great resource for me when I'm meeting with people.
Mhm. And within what you're all saying is that piece about listening and really hearing what people are saying. And with youth in particular, again, holding tight to that value of being non-judgmental. With young people, there's often a reflexive, even stronger than we have with adults. I need to help or save this person who's maybe making decisions that we don't feel are in their best interest, or they're using substances. And how do we balance that with peer values of self-determination and empowerment and voice, choice, and control? What does that look like? Perfect. So we're going to move right on into the second question. How does setting and maintaining boundaries vary when providing peer support to youth versus peer support to adults? And we'll start with Molly.
I think like there are some differences. I mean, I don't like to like make a lot of generalizations because like I think a lot of the people, young people that I work are on kind of like the adult side too. So, but I think that I always try to start out with like a really clear and honest conversation about like my my role and reason for the relationship. You know, a lot of times, especially with young people, like they're learning boundaries, and like that's like an essential part of like growing up. And I think like just being able to model those things is really important. And yeah, just having like really clear and open communication. And like a lot of times that opens up an opportunity to about like that we're not friends. Like a lot of times like youth will be like, I want to be your friend, and like you're my only friend, or like, and really like latch on like in a way that's not really helpful. So I think that that's like when I can like have an open conversation about like what that looks like. I liked what Tad Deacon says, you know, you don't get paid to be somebody's friend, and you don't write notes about your friends into a, you know, thing. So like having like an open conversation about that and just being like really honest kind of gives, and a lot of times that like gives the like an opportunity to like kind of talk about like what constitutes a healthy friendship or relationship. And like talking about like what's considered a friend, and like teaching those boundaries, which is cool with youth because like we're really getting to help set a framework for them moving into adulthood, and like really being able to set those like really healthy boundaries as an adult. I know like when I was young, I wish there would have been someone who would have been like, yeah, that's not really an appropriate thing to do, you know, because I didn't know. And then as I moved on and got older, like I could have avoided so many problems. So I think it's, you know, the boundaries are a huge deal for youth.
Yeah, and what you're really saying, Molly, is speaking to this youth like they're a real person and not just a youth, being really transparent, giving them that power to work with you to set those boundaries, naming when boundaries are being crossed, and what does it mean to be in a healthy relationship, and what does a healthy relationship mean, and having that real conversation that oftentimes youth are not given access to because they're not seen as capable of making those decisions or having those conversations. And so being the peer support specialist means that you get to have those conversations with the youth and really empower them to work with you to set those boundaries. Jesse, what do you think?
I'm going to take a slightly different approach to answering this question. I agree with what Molly said 100%. And I'm going to touch a little bit on the legal side. Legally, some boundaries have to be different. You know, I find that HIPAA is sometimes really weird when it comes into working with young people who have caregivers or parents who may have access to their medical records, or who really want to know what's going on with their young person. Also, trying to have boundaries about what is shared when maybe other providers are asking me, hey, what did they tell you? And there's just this expectation that I'm going to share whatever the young person has told me, sometimes just because they're a young person. And no, this isn't supposed to be happening, but it does. And so legally, I have to look at HIPAA and how I may need to have stricter boundaries with some people who aren't the young person in order to support the young person's autonomy and self-determination. I also want to make sure to mention that just like Molly said, boundaries is something that young people are usually trying to figure out when I'm working with them. And so a lot of times they'll try to find things out about me that working with adults, I don't usually get asked. I honestly thought I'd be able to think of one on the fly, but I'm not thinking of one right now. But usually I don't get asked by adults what classes I took in high school, or what my Facebook or social media is, or am I on TikTok, or like all these other things. And I can connect over seeing a TikTok trend. I can connect over having different classes, but they are going to usually ask me, in my experience, different questions. And so I need to know where my boundaries are and where I'm able and comfortable in sharing my story, because connection through these pieces is really important, but also I get to protect my story as well. And just because I'm a peer specialist doesn't mean that I have to share every piece of me with everyone that asks. So trying to find that balance in what am I okay with, and where's my boundary, and where's my comfort level, and also knowing that that is okay to flex over time. And whenever I am comfortable with something different, making sure that whatever I'm doing also aligns with professional and ethical boundaries as well.
I love that, Jessie. Just because I'm a peer specialist doesn't mean I have to share everything with everyone who asks. I think that's a really, really key takeaway. And I love what you're talking about, that they're going to be parts of our stories that maybe we haven't reflected on. How do I share this effectively? Because no one's ever asked. I've worked with young adults as well who wanted to connect through Facebook, through social media, and I had never really given it any thought. And then having to suddenly navigate those boundaries, and what you were talking about with just the different legal constructs that come into play when we're working with youth, and understanding that just because they might not be 18 doesn't mean that we have an obligation to share all of their information with everyone all the time. And how do we balance both? Why don't we hear from Tyler?
Thank you, Tim. How setting and maintaining boundaries when providing youth support to youth versus adults. For me, I keep 4 core values close to me that helps me as just not a peer support for youth and adults, but I stay in the hope, I'm empowering, I teach responsibility, and I give meaning. If I stay in those 4 core values, the boundaries the maintaining boundaries just kind of form itself. And another thing I want to touch on is, one way is I'm more available to youth than I am adults. I like to be that person that somebody they can call, and I'm very, with my time with adults, at 10 o'clock, hey, can't call me, I'm in bed. But with the youth, the youth needs are different than adult needs. And so with the youth, I'm way more available, I'm able to show support. And with the adults here, they have, a lot of resources, but with the youth, they may not even know any resources. So I like to be someone they can believe in. And that's, picking up the phone at 11 o'clock when they really need to do something. So how I maintain boundaries is just, if I stay in the hope, empowerment, responsibility, and meaning, the boundaries for me kind of just form and set themselves. And, again, I'm just, I'm available more to the youth than ever.
So really reflecting on some of the core values that you hold and bring into the work. When I'm setting boundaries, is it within, or when you're doing the work, is it within these 4 kind of principles, and how is that showing up? And then letting boundaries be created organically. And what you're talking about in terms of access to you and availability is really reflective of who has access to resources. Youth, generally speaking, might have less autonomy to access resources, less knowledge, less fiscal resources to pay for things. And so creating your more availability for them to access you in order to alleviate some of the stress that they might be experiencing from lack of access to other resources. Bonnie, could you close us out on this question, please?
Yes, I was just reflecting on a couple of things. I think that there are some systems in place in my state that I would be able to access that I just don't know if the families and if the youth know about. And so, as a peer support worker in an agency, it's really important for me to understand some of these resources for care. And so, like in Arkansas, we have with Medicaid, and if you have Medicaid, then you have you could have a care coordinator, which can be localized and that can help you navigate some of those waters in a community that I'm not from. So that was an important thing for me to realize, is that they may actually be accessible to some resources that we wouldn't know about, especially not with adults. It's just for youth. So that's important to become well versed in. And overall, I just think that it's so much more about what I think is best and what they want to do. And that is peer support across the board. But for youth, especially, when I had the opportunity to do like a youth, we did peer support groups, a youth support group for a diversion program here in Arkansas, and it was called Teen Narcotic Talks. They named it. They created the roles of the group, what the curriculum they wanted to cover. We did a rap, we did all this stuff. It was so incredible, but also to hear them talk about the solution that is actually within them. Because I think with adults, a lot of times we hear a lot of things all the time where we've been around the block, I guess, as they say, for a long time. There's a stigma with youth, is that maybe they haven't had enough, or they haven't lived long enough, or whatever the situation is. The answers are there. It's just sometimes we don't even realize it, right? And we haven't had that opportunity to share what we can discover, what's inside of us. And so having a youth group where we're all, talking about it on that equal playing field, I realized I have all the answers inside of me, and to hear it come from them, I swear, it is the most incredible experience. It's like coming out of I just love it. I love working with youth that are able to come up with the solution instead of just being told over and over and over. So anyway, super grateful to work with youth. It's exciting. Do it.
Yeah, and what you're really talking about is us as service providers, as peer specialists, as people who are generally going to be older than the people we're providing services to, pushing our boundaries and expanding our understanding of what are these people capable of. What are youth able to do? What solutions can they put forward? And trying to push past this idea that youth aren't educated or capable enough to create a system or a program or a solution like what you're talking about, and navigating our own boundaries and biases and how they come into play when providing services. And I did misspeak. So Joel, if you could close us out for this question, please, that would be perfect.
Yeah, no, boundaries are, I think, very important, things that, because when you yourself are in recovery, I think you might be more vulnerable to letting some boundaries slip. And I think with youth especially, and Jesse mentioned TikTok and Facebook and all that stuff, I this morning I heard of a coworker very indirectly talking about one of the families that she works with, and another service provider saw it and knew, even though a name wasn't mentioned, knew the case. And so we had to, make sure that coworker took her Facebook post down, and, we're gonna have to retrain, the staff and say, hey, you can't, even though it was, again, no, protective health information, names or anything else like that, but the boundary was crossed and somebody else saw it. The world is small, but the digital world, I think, is even smaller. You think it's a safe place to say things, but it's just, to me, that's the other side of boundaries. I don't know if other people, Tyler was able to get, is okay with getting phone calls after hours and such, but I think it's whatever peer is going to set their own boundaries. But to me, social media is kind of I wouldn't want to be Facebook friends or anything like that with the people that I work with.
Yeah, so even not just boundaries with the youth receiving services, but boundaries within organizations, with other coworkers, who's saying what, where, when, and how. I think you're spot on, Joel. Oftentimes we think, and even in sessions like these are training sessions, I've seen it come up where somebody is sharing about kind of a quote unquote case that they're talking about, and they're trying to do it in a way that maintains anonymity and everybody in the room knows who they're talking about.
Yeah.
And then it's like, why did you bring this up to begin with, and who has control over different people's stories and who gets to share them with whom. And that's difficult with peer support when it's so focused on storytelling and empathy and connection. All right, and I did just also want to say that I'm seeing a lot of really great engagement in the chat. Everybody really loves what you're saying. It seems like it's really resonating with the audience, and so I'm really appreciative to see that. All right, third quote, am I right? Yes. Third question. What are some effective strategies that you found for maintaining core peer values, such as informed consent, empowerment, mutuality, and multiple pathways to recovery when providing peer support to youth? And we're going to start with Jessie.
Thanks, Tim. So for me, I want to first say what I'm about to say, I don't do in adultification. If you know what adultification is, what I'm about to say is not that. What I do is when I'm working with youth and young adults, I always remember that if they're under 18, they're a human with some of their legal rights restricted. And so I'm not trying to put a bunch of responsibility on them like adultification does, but I am trying to recognize that this is a human. And just like all humans, we have wants and needs and desires. And this one person who happens to be under 18 has some of those rights and abilities restricted because of their age legally, or because they have a caregiver, or because of whatever situation. And so when I look at working with young people in that way of this is just a human. This is a human who has some of their rights and everything restricted, then I can look at them as just another person that I'm working with. And when I take that hierarchy of age out of it, then I'm able to connect more on that mutualistic front and be able to have a true, authentic relationship with this person in a professional peer support sense, rather than, oh, I'm going to help you. I'm going to teach you. I'm going to bring you to this place with me. I work with somebody as a person and I support them in their wants and needs and where they want to go on their recovery, not where I think they should go. And so I always have to make sure that I'm keeping at the forefront that this is a person and I'm supporting a person, whether they are under 18 or not. I need to make sure that I am being as authentically me as possible as well. Because if I'm hiding a piece of me, then I am already veering off the path of our core values. Here in Texas, we have honesty, open-mindedness, mutuality, did I say authenticity already? and respect. We have some 5 core values, and I always try to make sure that I'm keeping those right at the forefront. Sometimes if I'm working with people in person, because I'm not currently working in direct service right now, but if I'm working with people in person, sometimes I'll even just pin them to the wall so that I can keep them front and center throughout all of my interactions and really try and center that mutuality and remove those hierarchies of age.
So moving into mutual spaces, really, I also hear kind of bits and pieces of kind of collectivism coming into play and how you're approaching this. And I also saw in the chat Anna Gray talking about in Texas how something called the disability of minority and how we conceptualize what does it mean to be a minor or somebody who's underage? How does that impact how we access services? But really centering that this is still a person, they still deserve authenticity, they still deserve empowerment, they still deserve mutuality, the right to make their own decisions. They're still a person, they're not any lesser just because they're not 18. Bonnie, what do you think?
Excellent discussion, Jessie. Thank you so much for that. And also the clarity, Tim, that was really good. I completely agree. And just a quick story. So when I worked at the Division of Youth Services, just very quickly started working with peers, and they came in, sometimes they have shackles, sometimes they are, of a different race. Definitely, at that point, I was 29, so I was a little bit older, but I sat down at the table, and at first it was very overwhelming, but very quickly got into the role of of peer support in that. And then also I want to highlight that it wasn't necessarily youth support because my certification is peer support. And I think that it's important for me to understand that there is something called youth support, and that's what this panel is highlighting. But I was working with youth as a peer support specialist. So anyway, I didn't mean to say that, but it came out. So I sat down with him, and he's from Malvern, Arkansas. And it was one of those things where it was like, he actually told me about what he needed. And I think at that point, he'd been in the system twice. This was the second time for revocation. And he said, all I needed was a mentor. That's all I needed. I asked for a mentor. That's what I needed. I don't need these worksheets. I already know how to get through here. I'm going to get out of here with no problems. I just need, in my community, I need a mentor. And I was like, that's the answer. That's it. How simple is that? And so it was just like very powerful to me to have a safe space to meet with our youth and to let them speak. And I think that's a lot about the core value for peer support for me. And then also facilitating groups. When I look at the definition of recovery, even coming from SAMHSA and looking at the definition of this wholeness and this wellness, I realize that I start to steer clear from abstinence based when I'm working with youth, because I think that there is this idea of like, I'm going to grow up and I'm never going to be able to do that, whatever. What we focused on was, what kind of person do you want to be? And are the actions that are happening, is that leading you on that path? And that's this language of, am I acting in a way that that is going to help me grow into a healthy person that I want to be? And when we focus on that, and we focus on our action and our attitudes and the things around me, I think it just becomes a more holistic peer group. And I'm just super, I take that approach every time. It's kind of safe for me. And that will take multiple pathways that will help focus with that will help, the mutuality in the group of like being able to listen to each other and hear where our importance are. And I can share honestly in a group about where I'm at with my wellness. So anyway, those are some of the things that I have kept with working with peers as well.
Mhm. Yeah, really shifting into that space of, how do I support you in developing a life that has meaning to you, kind of regardless of whether or not you're using substances, which isn't to say that you're encouraging substance use, just that the focus is no longer on, we need to stop substance use or we need to reduce quote unquote depressive symptoms. Rather, how do you develop into the person that you want to be in a way that has meaning to you, that supports your continued growth? And that's really the core of peer support. That's really what peer support is about. It's not about getting people abstinent or into treatment or addressing symptoms. It's really, how do I support you in building a meaningful life? And to bring that into youth spaces, I think really is revolutionary. All right. So question 4, how has the provision of peer support been impacted by the shift to telehealth services? And how have you navigated barriers that have come about because of this shift, of course, specifically as it pertains to youth? And we're going to start with Joel.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a big thing for the past year and a half. I think it was different with my work with people that I already been working with versus like a new case, a new referral. Because to me, it's just very difficult to call somebody, cold call them out of the blue. Hey, I'm Joel. I'm your peer worker. How's it going? You know what I mean? It's just hard. That rapport is very, very, very challenging virtually. It's so much different. There's the body language isn't there. That mutuality is compromised, I feel. But and even just like kind of the nuts and bolts of it, it's a lot of youth don't have their own cell phone, so they'd have to ask a family member, a mom, a dad, a neighbor, whoever, to use their phone to get in contact with them. So it's been, it's a really big hurdle for me, my company, and it's been even so much so that we've had to, because in Louisiana, we get referrals of youth from a wraparound. We work with the wraparound agency, and a lot of times the wraparound agencies have to give families, data minutes so that they could actually have youth support and parent support services. Just because sometimes these phone calls go a long time, and the families would sometimes complain and say, hey, I really want the services, but I can't afford to be on the phone. Me, and then, my son, he's also on the phone. So that's like 2 hours a week for each of us or something like that, so there's just a lot of things that came about in this COVID world that I was very surprising and kind of eye-opening. And it's been a challenge. I wish I could say we solved it and overcame all these barriers, but still to this day, it's a challenge.
Yeah, so again, linking back to who has access to the means to participate in services when everything is done electronically, in terms of just physically having the technology you need, and also fiscally, can you pay for this service? When it comes to cell phone bills, when it comes to internet usage, when it comes to data usage. And then the next step as well, of course, is considering within multiply marginalized communities or additional marginalized communities who might be accessing services or wanting to, there's that additional layer that comes into play as well. And I appreciate you acknowledging, Joel, that it's an ongoing effort. It's not something that's been solved. It is something that we're still trying to navigate. Tyler, what do you think?
All right. So when, the pandemic happened and my agency went all virtual, we had Zooms, we had all this stuff, we were able to still do the telecommuting. But with the youth that I work with, I'm not going to lie, it was kind of easy. All the youth had access to phones. And so with my, we created a Facebook Messenger group, the title of our place, and we were still able to talk, still openly do videos. Now the challenges was, not knowing the schedule after you tell them 12 times, that was a little bit of challenge. But we really during the year were able to connect with the Facebook Messenger group. Like I said on question 2, availability was so important, especially during a pandemic when you're dealing with so many variables. And so, we kind of just fell into it, and it really worked for us to create a message group. Now, I don't have Facebook, but I do Messenger. And so, it was really that availability really grew. And with that talking and meeting once a week virtually and being able to talk, like even on a Sunday night when you're going with stuff, all the youth that we were working with during the pandemic, once we opened again in March, are right here with us. And I think the communication and the openness really stabilized and put that into perspective as, come on in now, we'll still do the group. And, it was just, I'm not going to lie, like it just kind of fell in our lap and we rolled with it, and it really did work for us.
Yeah, that's exciting. So of course it's going to vary, depending on where you're at and who has access to what, but to hear that it can be done successfully and sometimes even easily is really exciting to hear. And I think it's such a good representation of meeting people where they're at. There is kind of that general idea that youth are more active on social media, more fluent in technology. And so to be able to connect with them on spaces that maybe hold a little bit more confidentiality. You could be messaging someone on Facebook Messenger while you're with your friends and they don't know that maybe you're asking for help or you're receiving some support right then. And that additional layer of, as I think as youth, there's just an extra level of like, I want to be perceived in specific ways. And so being able to access help without everybody knowing can sometimes lead to greater engagement. All right, and Bonnie.
So thank you again. And I think when COVID first hit, I was working for the state. And of course, I was working with a population that was isolated from the community because they were incarcerated. But we had to just like figure out how to reach our youth, especially that we're now really disconnected from society at this point. And so we started doing Zoom meetings and being able to bring that message in. And we went compliant with all the HIPAA regulations, of course. But one thing that was really cool was I also was able to speak with youth across the country to record some videos and being able to share that with our youth that are incarcerated. That would have never happened if we were just focusing on bringing bodies in. This was through virtual interaction, able to bring youth from other parts of the country in to share their story and that are directly related to their, or at least closely related to their experience. And so that was just something that we can do. It's just really get creative with bringing all these voices in, especially in rural parts of Arkansas. I spoke about this earlier today. Those resources are just really not there. I wish I could say that they are, but they aren't. When you're talking about a young person that's in a farmer's town and they have a gas station and a high school and like a hospital that closed